I never thought I'd be declaring war on my own son. At 68, after 35 years of teaching 3rd grade and a lifetime of careful saving, I was finally ready for retirement in my little coastal home in Maine. The morning I opened my bank statement and saw a balance of $247,000, where there should have been $180,000, I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart. That had already broken when my husband Tom died 15 years ago. This was something deeper. My faith in the one person I had sacrificed everything for. Daniel had cleaned out my retirement account without asking, without even telling me. My only son, the boy I'd raised alone after cancer took his father, had stolen my future. But what hurt most wasn't the money. It was realizing that after all these years of giving, I'd raised a man who saw me as nothing more than his personal bank account. How do you fight back when the enemy shares your DNA? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wedding photo still sits on my mantle, though I've been tempted to turn it face down more times than I can count. Tom and me, 1975, both of us 23, and foolishly optimistic about what life would bring. He's wearing that crooked smile that made me fall in love with him during our sophomore year at the University of Maine, and I'm in my grandmother's lace dress, holding white roses that cost more than we could afford. We look so young in that picture, so certain that love would be enough to carry us through whatever came next. In some ways it was. We had 13 good years before the cancer diagnosis, and even then Tom faced it with the same quiet determination he brought to everything else. He was a carpenter by trade, but he had the soul of a poet. He'd leave little notes in my lunch bag, silly drawings tucked into my teaching materials, flowers picked from our neighbor's yard when he thought they wouldn't notice. When Daniel was born in 1985, Tom cried harder than I did. He'd wanted children so desperately, had already started building a crib in our tiny garage before we'd even finished the first trimester. This little guy's going to have everything we didn't. He whispered that first night in the hospital, Daniel sleeping peacefully in his arms. For 12 years, it felt like we were living the life we'd dreamed about in that wedding photo. Our house on Maple Street wasn't much, a modest 2-bedroom Cape Cod with a postage stamp yard. But Tom had transformed it with his hands. Built-in bookshelves in the living room, a window seat overlooking the harbor, a treehouse in the ancient oak that Daniel claimed as his fort. Every board, every nail was placed with love. I taught at Ocean View Elementary, the same school Daniel would attend years later. 3rd graders were my specialty, old enough to have real conversations, young enough to still believe in magic. I loved those early years of teaching, when every day felt like a small adventure, and coming home meant sharing stories with Tom while he cooked dinner and Daniel played with his blocks on the kitchen floor. Our neighbor Marla moved in 2 houses down when Daniel was 8. She was already a widow then. Her first husband had died in Vietnam, her second in a fishing accident off the coast of Bar Harbor. But Marla had this incredible ability to find joy in small things. She'd show up at our door with fresh blueberry, muffins or a bottle of wine, always ready with a story that would leave us laughing until our sides hurt. "You two have no idea how good you have it," she'd say, watching Tom chase Daniel around the yard, or seeing us share quiet moments on the porch after bedtime. She was right, of course. We did have it good. Better than good. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in March, just after Daniel's 12th birthday. Tom had been complaining about fatigue for months, but we'd attributed it to the long winter and a particularly demanding construction project. When Dr. Peterson called us into his office and used words like aggressive, and advanced. I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. Tom took it better than I did, at least on the surface. "We've got time," he said, holding my hand in the parking lot afterward. "Maybe not as much as we'd planned, but we've got time." He was wrong. We had 8 months. Those 8 months taught me things about love and loss I'd never wanted to learn. I watched my strong, capable husband become fragile and dependent. Watched him struggle with the knowledge that he wouldn't see Daniel graduate high school or walk me through our golden years. But I also watched him pour everything he had into those final months, teaching Daniel how to use power tools, writing letters for birthdays and graduations he'd never attend, recording bedtime stories on cassette tapes that I still have in a shoebox upstairs. The night before he died, Tom called me over to his hospital bed. Daniel was asleep in the chair beside us, exhausted from a long day of trying to pretend everything was normal. "Promise me something," Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. "Anything. Don't let him use this as an excuse. Don't let losing me become a reason to stop trying," I promised, though I had no idea what that would mean in practice. The funeral was held at St. Margaret's, the little stone church where we'd been married. Half the town showed up. Tom's construction crew, parents of my students, neighbors who'd watched Daniel grow up. Everyone had a story about Tom's kindness, his generosity, the way he'd drop everything to help someone fix a leaky roof or move furniture. After the service, Marla took me aside. "You're going to get through this," she said. "It's going to be hell for a while, but you're stronger than you know." She was right about the hell part. The months after Tom's death were the darkest of my life. I'd wake up reaching for him, forgetting for those first few seconds that the other side of the bed would be empty. Daniel struggled too, his grades slipping, his sunny disposition replaced by sullen silence. Some nights I'd find him crying in the treehouse, clutching one of Tom's old flannel shirts. But we did get through it. Slowly, painfully, we found our new normal. I threw myself into teaching with renewed purpose, staying late to help struggling students, volunteering for every committee and after-school program. Daniel channeled his grief into sports: basketball, baseball, track. He was good at all of them, but more importantly, they gave him structure and teammates who became like brothers. The house felt too big and too small at the same time. Too big because Tom's absence echoed in every room. Too small because Daniel seemed to fill every space with his energy and needs and teenage emotions. I redecorated his room twice, bought him a computer when they became affordable, drove him to practices and games and friends' houses without complaint. Money was tight. Tom's life insurance helped, but a teacher's salary only stretched so far. I learned to coupon, to buy generic brands, to make meals that would last for days. Daniel never went without, but I went without plenty. New clothes became rare luxuries. Dinners out were reserved for special occasions. The vacation fund I'd started remained untouched because there was always something Daniel needed more. When he was accepted to the University of Maine on a partial scholarship, I was so proud I cried in the grocery store while reading his acceptance letter. The partial scholarship wasn't enough, of course, so I took out a second mortgage on the house and picked up summer tutoring jobs to cover the rest. "You don't have to do this, Mom," Daniel said the night before he left for college. We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the harbor gold and pink. "Yes, I do," I told him. "Your father would have found a way." "So will I." And I did find a way. 4 years of creative financing, careful budgeting, and more prayer than I'd offered since Tom's illness. Daniel graduated with a degree in business and what seemed like unlimited confidence in his ability to conquer the world. The first business venture was a food truck. He'd fallen in love with the idea during his senior year, convinced that Ocean View needed gourmet grilled cheese and tomato soup, delivered to construction sites and office buildings. I co-signed the loan for $25,000, telling myself it was an investment in his future. The food truck lasted 8 months. Equipment problems, permit issues, and Daniel's tendency to give away free meals to anyone with a sob story turned potential profit into mounting debt. When he came to me with the default notice, I didn't hesitate to help him pay it off. Tom's voice echoed in my head. Don't let losing me become a reason to stop trying. The second venture was a landscaping business. Daniel had always been good. With his hands, had learned enough from Tom to know his way around tools and outdoor projects. This one seemed more promising, more practical. I loaned him another $15,000 for equipment and a used truck. This time it lasted 2 years. Daniel was good at the work, but terrible at the business side. Billing clients, managing expenses, planning for seasonal fluctuations. When he came to me the second time, I was starting to see a pattern, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. Third, time's the charm, he said with that same crooked smile that reminded me so much of his father. I've learned from my mistakes. The third venture was app development. Daniel had taught himself programming and was convinced he could create the next big thing in social media. This one required a bigger investment. $40,000 for equipment, software licenses, and living expenses while he worked on the prototype. I was 58 by then, starting to think seriously about retirement. My nest egg, built slowly over decades of careful saving, was beginning to look substantial enough to support a modest lifestyle. I'd even started browsing real estate listings for smaller places closer to the harbor, dreaming of a little cottage where I could read books and tend a garden, and maybe finally open the small bookshop I'd fantasized about since college. But Daniel needed this chance. He was 35, still unmarried, still searching for his place in the world. The app idea seemed solid, something with real potential. Against my better judgment, against Marla's increasingly pointed warnings, I took out most of my retirement savings and invested in Daniel's dream. That was 3 years ago. The app never launched. Daniel met Evelyn, a social worker from Portland, and they had a whirlwind romance that resulted in marriage, and 9 months later, Zoe. Suddenly, Daniel needed a house, needed stability, needed to be a responsible father and husband. I helped with the down payment, helped with the wedding costs, helped with the nursery furniture and the pediatrician bills, and the 1,000 small expenses that come with starting a family. Evelyn was a sweet girl, though I could see the worry lines forming around her eyes as Daniel's financial irresponsibility became clear. She tried to manage their budget, tried to rein in his impulse purchases and grandiose plans. But Daniel had a way of making every expense seem necessary, every investment seem promising. When Zoe was born, I fell in love all over. Again, she had Tom's eyes and Daniel's stubborn chin, and holding her felt like holding a piece of the future I thought I'd lost. I babysat every weekend, bought clothes and toys and books, started a college fund that I contributed to religiously. For a while it seemed like fatherhood might be the thing that finally grounded Daniel. He talked about providing for his family, about being the man Tom would have wanted him to be. He got a job at a marketing firm in Portland, seemed to settle into a routine of commuting and coming home to dinner with his wife and daughter. But old habits die hard. The job lasted 18 months before Daniel decided his boss didn't appreciate his innovative ideas. The next job lasted 10 months. The one after that, 6. Each time, Daniel had explanations. Office politics, creative, differences, economic downturns. Each time I found myself helping with mortgage payments or utility bills while he looked for the next opportunity. Evelyn left him when Zoe was 5. She'd had enough of the financial instability, the broken promises, the way Daniel seemed to expect the world to adapt to his dreams rather than adapting his dreams to reality. The divorce was amicable. Evelyn didn't want to punish Daniel, just protect herself and Zoe from his chaos. Daniel moved back in with me for 6 months after the divorce, sleeping in his childhood bedroom while he figured things out. Those were difficult months. He was depressed, angry, convinced that everyone had given up on him too easily. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid that anything I said would sound like criticism or judgment. When he finally moved out, it was into a small apartment above the harbor. Not ideal, but a step toward independence. He saw Zoe every other weekend and 2 evenings a week, and for a while that seemed to motivate him to stay employed and responsible. The latest business venture started 2 years ago. Another app, this one focused on connecting local farmers with restaurants. Daniel was convinced this was different, that he'd learned from his previous mistakes, that this time he had a real business plan and realistic expectations. He didn't ask me for money. Not directly. Instead, he talked about opportunities, about potential returns, about finally having something that would make his father proud. He showed me market research and prototype designs, spoke with such passion and confidence that I almost believed him myself. "I don't need you to invest, Mom," he said over dinner one evening. "I've got it covered. But if you want to be part of something big, if you want to see your son finally succeed, there's room for you." I should have said no, should have learned from the previous failures, should have listened to the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Marla warning me about enabling versus helping. But Daniel seemed so sure this time, so determined to prove himself. I invested $50,000, half of what remained in my retirement account. For a year, things seemed promising. Daniel hired 2 programmers, rented office space, started building relationships with local farms and restaurants. He sent me monthly updates, showed me early versions of the app, introduced me to his business partners as my biggest supporter. Then the updates became less frequent. The demo version stopped working properly. When I asked questions, Daniel's answers became vague, full of technical jargon and promises that things would smooth out soon. 6 months ago, the updates stopped altogether. When I called Daniel's office, I got a disconnected number. When I drove by, the space was empty, a "for rent" sign in the window. "It's just a temporary setback," Daniel explained when I finally cornered him. "We're restructuring, moving to a home-based model. These things take time." That's when I started paying closer attention to my bank statements. Started noticing small withdrawals I didn't remember making, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. When I called the bank, they explained that Daniel had power of attorney over my accounts, something I'd granted him years earlier when I'd had surgery and needed help managing bills while I recovered. I'd forgotten about the power of attorney, forgotten that in my eagerness to make things easy for Daniel during my brief incapacitation, I'd essentially given him the keys to my financial kingdom. The full extent of the theft became clear last month. Not just the $50,000 I'd willingly invested, but another $130,000 withdrawn over the past year. Small amounts at first, $2,000 here, $5,000 there. Then larger chunks as Daniel became bolder or more desperate. My retirement fund, built over 35 years of teaching, saving, and sacrificing, was gone. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd planned for, everything I'd dreamed of, reduced to $247.83, and a growing sense of betrayal that made it hard to breathe. The morning I found that bank statement, I sat in my kitchen for 3 hours, staring at the numbers, waiting for them to make sense. This wasn't just financial theft. This was a fundamental violation of trust, a rejection of everything I'd tried to teach Daniel about responsibility and respect and gratitude. I thought about Tom, about the promises I'd made to him, about the man we'd both hoped Daniel would become. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the opportunities I'd passed up, all the times I'd chosen Daniel's needs over my own. And for the first time in 26 years of single motherhood, I wondered if I'd been doing it all wrong. The power of attorney document was buried in a manila folder labeled Important Papers that I kept in the old oak desk Tom had built for our first apartment. I hadn't looked at it in years, had almost forgotten it existed until the bank representative mentioned it during our phone call. "Mrs. Monroe, according to our records, your son Daniel has had authorized access to your accounts since 2018. He presented valid power of attorney documentation that allows him to make withdrawals and transfers on your behalf." I remember asking her to repeat that, certain I'd misheard. Power of attorney. The words felt foreign, dangerous, like a weapon I'd handed to someone without understanding what they were capable of doing with it. Finding the document brought it all back. The emergency gallbladder surgery that had knocked me flat for 2 weeks. The complications that extended my recovery to nearly a month. Daniel had been so helpful during that time, handling my bills, managing my medications, driving me to follow-up appointments. He'd suggested the power of attorney as a practical measure, just in case something like this happens again, Mom, so I can take care of things without having to bother you while you're recovering. I'd signed it without question. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, my only family, the person I trusted most in the world. The lawyer had explained that it would remain in effect until I formally revoked it, but I'd assumed it was just a safety net, something we'd never actually need to use. I never imagined Daniel would use it to systematically drain my life savings. Confronting him wasn't something I planned. It just happened. I was still sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the afternoon, surrounded by bank statements and that damning legal document, when Daniel's truck pulled into my driveway. He had his own key, another gesture of trust that now felt like a violation, and he walked into my house like he owned it. "Hey, Mom," he called from the entryway, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness I'd learned to recognize as a warning sign. "How's your day going?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was looking at my son, this tall, handsome man who still had his father's eyes and his grandfather's stubborn jaw, and seeing a stranger, someone who could smile and make small talk while systematically stealing my future. "Mom?" Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I watched his expression change as he took in the papers scattered across my table, the bank statements, the power of attorney, the calculator showing the devastating total of his theft. "Sit down," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm in a way that felt dangerous. Daniel remained standing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Look, I can explain. Sit down." He sat. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the table where he'd eaten thousands of meals, done homework, blown out birthday candles, shared his dreams and fears and everything. In between, the same table where Tom had held him after nightmares, where I'd helped him with science projects, where we'd grieved together after his father died. $130,000, I said. "That's how much you've stolen from me." "It's not stealing, Mom. It's, what would you call it?" Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from his childhood. It's a loan. I was going to pay it back. The business is just taking longer to get off the ground than I expected." "What business?" "Your office is empty. Your phone is disconnected. Your partners won't return my calls." The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Peterson's wind chimes tinkling in the breeze, the distant sound of traffic on Harbor Street, the normal sounds of a world that continued spinning while mine fell apart. "The app market is more competitive than we anticipated," Daniel finally said. "We needed to pivot, restructure our approach. Sometimes you have to take a step back before you can move forward." "Stop!" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Just stop talking." Daniel's mouth snapped shut. For a moment, he looked like the 12-year-old boy who'd broken Mrs. Peterson's window with a baseball, caught between defiance and the desperate hope that somehow this could all be explained away. "Do you remember what your father made me promise?" I asked. Daniel frowned. "Mom, I don't—" "The night before he died, he made me promise not to let you use his death as an excuse to stop trying. Do you remember me telling you that?" "Yes, but—" "I don't see what— I thought he meant I shouldn't let you give up on your dreams. I thought he was warning me not to let grief make you small or afraid." I picked up the bank statement, held it between us like evidence at a trial. It never occurred to me that he might have been warning me about something else entirely. Daniel shifted in his chair. "What are you talking about?" "I think he was warning me not to let you use his death as an excuse to stop being responsible for yourself. Not to let you turn me into a safety net that would always catch you when you fell. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it?" I spread the bank statements across the table like a deck of cards. "Let's see. The food truck, $25,000. The landscaping business, $15,000. The first app, $40,000. The second app, $50,000. And now this, $130,000 taken without permission. I had permission. The power of attorney was for emergencies, for times when I couldn't manage my own affairs. It wasn't a license to steal." Daniel's face flushed red. "I'm not a thief. I'm your son. Everything I've done, every business I've started, it's been about building something we could both be proud of, about finally becoming the man Dad wanted me to be." "Your father wanted you to be honest. He wanted you to be responsible. He wanted you to understand that love doesn't mean taking advantage of the people who care about you." I was going to pay it back. "With what?" "You don't have a job. You don't have income. You don't even have a business plan that makes sense." I leaned forward, studying his face. "When was the last time you had a realistic idea about money, Daniel? When was the last time you lived within your means?" "Mom, please? I know this looks bad, but if you could just give me a little more time." "Time for what? To steal the rest? To take my house? To leave me with nothing?" "I would never do that." "You already have done that. My retirement is gone. My security is gone. My ability to take care of myself in my old age. Gone." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "I'll fix this." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I will. I'll get a job. You'll what? Work at minimum wage for the next 20 years to pay back money you had no right to take? Assuming you could even keep a job that long?" The cruelty of my words hung between us. I could see Daniel flinch, could see the little boy inside the grown man who was being forced to face consequences for the first time in his adult life. But I was past caring about his feelings, past worrying about whether I was being too harsh or too demanding. I was thinking about my own future now, about what my life was going to look like with $247.83 in savings, and no way to replace what had been stolen. I trusted you, I said. I gave you everything I had, everything I was, everything I'd saved for my future. And you took it all. Mom, I'm 68 years old. Do you understand what that means? I don't have time to start over. I don't have decades to build another retirement fund. I don't have the luxury of making mistakes and learning from them and trying again. Daniel was crying now, silent tears that reminded me of the night his father died. Please don't hate me. I don't hate you. The word surprised me. I'd expected to feel hatred, had braced myself for rage and bitterness, and the kind of anger that burns everything in its path. Instead, I felt something worse. Disappointment so profound it was like grief. I'm just done enabling you. What does that mean? I looked around my kitchen, at the home Tom and I had built together, at the life I'd constructed around being Daniel's mother and safety net and endless source of support. For the first time in 26 years, I wondered what my life might look like if I stopped making Daniel's problems my own. It means I'm going to revoke your power of attorney. It means I'm going to talk to a lawyer about recovering my money. It means I'm going to stop pretending that helping you is the same thing as loving you. Daniel stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. You're talking about taking legal action against your own son? I'm talking about protecting myself, something I should have done a long time ago. Mom, please, think about what you're saying. Think about what Dad would want. Don't. The word came out like a gunshot. Don't you dare use your father's memory to justify what you've done. Tom never would have taken advantage of someone who loved him. Tom never would have stolen from his own mother. Daniel's face went white. I didn't steal. Get out. What? Get out of my house? Take your key and leave it on the table. And get out. Mom, we can work this out. We can figure something out together. The time for working things out together is over. You made a choice when you decided to take my money without asking. Now I'm making a choice too. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Maybe he was. Maybe I'd been invisible to him for so long. Just a source of money and support and unconditional forgiveness, that he'd forgotten I was a person with my own needs and rights and limits. Slowly, he pulled out his keyring and worked my house key free. It made a small metallic sound when he set it on the table. Final and irrevocable. I love you, Mom. I know, I said. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. After he left, I sat in my empty kitchen and tried to figure out what came next. The power of attorney would be revoked first thing Monday morning. Then I'd call a lawyer, maybe talk to the police about filing charges. I'd have to figure out how to live on Social Security and the small teacher's pension I'd be eligible for next year. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through every bank statement, every credit card bill, every financial document I could find. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. Not only had Daniel drained my retirement savings, but he'd also been using my credit cards. The bills I'd thought were for my own expenses, groceries, utilities, home repairs, had been inflated with his purchases. Restaurants I'd never been to, electronics I didn't own, even a vacation to Florida that he'd apparently taken with some woman I'd never met. By evening, I calculated that Daniel had taken, or spent, nearly $200,000 of my money over the past 3 years, money I'd saved by buying generic groceries and driving a 15-year-old car and never taking vacations and saying no to every small luxury that might have made my life a little easier. That night, I called Marla. I was wondering when you'd figure it out, she said after I'd explained everything. I've been watching him come and go from your house at odd times. Saw him loading things into his truck that I was pretty sure weren't his. Why didn't you say something? Would you have believed me? She was right. I wouldn't have. I'd have defended Daniel, made excuses for him, found ways to explain away whatever evidence Marla presented. I'd been doing it for so long, it had become automatic. What are you going to do now? Marla asked. I don't know. I need to think. You need to fight back. Marla. No, Helen. You need to stop being his victim and start being his mother. Real mothers don't let their children get away with behavior like this. Real mothers teach consequences. After I hung up, I sat on my porch and watched the sun set over the harbor. The water was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and I could see a few boats heading back to shore after a day of fishing. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems. I thought about the life I'd planned for myself. The little cottage by the water. The bookshop that would give me something to do with my days. The freedom to travel, to explore, to finally discover who Helen Monroe was when she wasn't busy being Daniel's mother. All of that was gone now, stolen by the person I'd loved most in the world. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, I realized something else. For the first time in years, I felt clear about what I needed to do. Not what was best for Daniel, not what would keep the peace, not what would maintain our relationship. What I needed to do for myself. Tom's toolbox had been sitting in the garage since the day he died, untouched except for the occasional time Daniel needed to borrow a screwdriver or hammer. Monday morning, 3 days after my confrontation with Daniel, I found myself standing in front of it, running my fingers over the scratched metal surface. Tom had built this box himself, from oak scraps left over from a kitchen renovation. His initials were carved into the lid, TM, along with the date, 1978. Inside, every tool had its place. Wrenches arranged by size, screwdrivers sorted by type. Everything clean and organized and ready for use. Tom had been meticulous about his tools, understanding that a craftsman was only as good as the equipment he maintained. I was looking for a measuring tape to start cataloging the house, but what I found instead was a letter tucked into the lid of the toolbox. My name written in Tom's careful handwriting on an envelope that had yellowed with age. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated just a week before his death. Helen, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably going through my things. I hope it also means enough time has passed that you're starting to think about your own future instead of just surviving each day. I've been thinking a lot about Daniel lately. About the kind of man he's becoming and the kind of man I hope he'll be. I worry that losing me so young will either make him stronger or teach him that life is unfair and he deserves compensation for his losses. I need you to know that it's not your job to be his compensation. You are not responsible for fixing what losing me might break in him. Your job is to love him enough to let him learn from his mistakes. Even when those mistakes hurt, especially when those mistakes hurt. If he takes advantage of your love, it's because I failed to teach him better, not because you failed to give enough. Don't sacrifice your future trying to repair my failures. Take care of yourself first. Be happy. Find out who you are when you're not busy being someone else's solution to their problems. I love you. Tom, I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. Tom had known. Somehow, even facing his own death, he'd seen what I was too close to recognize. He'd understood that my love for Daniel could become a trap for both of us if I didn't learn to set boundaries. The measuring tape was forgotten, I took the letter into the house and called the law office Marla had recommended. Law offices of Patricia Caldwell. A crisp voice answered. I need to make an appointment, I said. I think my son has been stealing from me, and I need to know what my options are. The appointment was set for Wednesday afternoon. In the meantime, I had work to do. I started with the power of attorney revocation. The bank required me to appear in person with proper identification and a notarized statement declaring my intent to revoke Daniel's access to my accounts. The process took 2 hours and involved enough paperwork to deforest a small tree. But when it was finished, I felt like I could breathe again. We'll need to issue you new account numbers, the bank manager explained. And I'd recommend changing any automatic payments or direct deposits you have set up. I spent the rest of Monday updating my Social Security direct deposit, my pension, information, and the automatic payments for my utilities and insurance. Tedious work, but necessary. Every change felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that had been taken without permission. Tuesday morning brought a phone call from Daniel. Mom, I can't access the accounts, he said without preamble. Did something happen with the bank? I revoked your power of attorney. Silence. Then, why would you do that? Because you abused it. I told you. I was going to pay everything back. You didn't need to. With what money, Daniel? You don't have a job. You don't have a business. You don't have any realistic way to replace what you've taken. I'm working on something new. There's this opportunity in real estate development. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I unplugged it from the wall. That afternoon, Marla came over with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. How are you holding up? I'm not sure, I admitted. I keep waiting to feel guilty about cutting him off, but mostly I just feel tired. Guilt is just another way of putting his needs ahead of your own, Marla said, opening the wine. You've been doing that for so long, you've probably forgotten you have needs. She was right. I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision, based purely on what I wanted rather than what Daniel needed or what would keep him happy or what would maintain family peace. What do you want, Helen? Marla asked. Not what's best for Daniel. Not what Tom would have wanted. Not what looks good to the neighbors. What do you actually want for yourself? The question caught me off guard. I poured wine into 2 glasses, buying time to think. I want my money back, I said finally. Good. What else? I want to feel safe in my own home. I want to stop worrying about what Daniel is going to do next, what crisis he's going to create, what he's going to need from me. What else? I want to be able to retire. I want to have enough money to take care of myself, without being a burden on anyone. I want to open that bookshop I've been dreaming about since I was 25. Now we're getting somewhere, Marla said. So what's your plan? I told her about the lawyer appointment, about revoking the power of attorney, about trying to figure out exactly how much Daniel had taken. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's a start, she said. But recovery is about more than just money. You need to think about how you're going to protect yourself going forward. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tom's letter, about his warning that I might sacrifice my future trying to repair his failures. Had I been doing that? Had my entire approach to parenting Daniel been motivated by guilt over what he'd lost when his father died? I got up and went through photo albums, looking for clues about when things had started to go wrong. The pictures told a story I'd been too close to see while living it. Daniel at 13, sullen and angry after Tom's death. Daniel at 16, charming his way out of consequences when he wrecked my car. Daniel at 20, dropping out of college after one semester because he'd found better opportunities in the real world. Daniel at 25, full of enthusiasm about the food truck that would make us both rich. In every photo after his father's death, I could see the pattern. Daniel creating problems, me solving them. Daniel making poor choices, me cushioning the consequences. Daniel taking risks with other people's money, me making sure he never had to face the full cost of failure. I'd thought I was being a good mother. I'd thought I was honoring Tom's memory by making sure Daniel never felt abandoned or unsupported. But Tom's letter suggested something different. Maybe the best way to honor his memory was to love Daniel enough to let him fail. Wednesday's appointment with Patricia Caldwell was a revelation. Patricia was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct manner that suggested she'd seen every variation of family financial drama and wasn't easily shocked. "How much total are we talking about?" she asked after I'd explained the situation. "Close to $200,000, including unauthorized credit card use." Patricia made a note. "And he had legal access through the power of attorney." "Yes, but surely there must be limits." "There are. Power of attorney is supposed to be used in the principal's best interest, not for the agent's benefit. Taking money for personal use without permission could constitute financial abuse, regardless of the family relationship. So I can file charges? You can. The question is whether you want to." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "Criminal charges against your son would likely result in jail time if he's convicted. Are you prepared for that consequence?" The thought of Daniel in jail made my stomach twist. But then I thought about the $247.83 in my savings account, about the retirement I'd lost, about the 35 years of careful saving that had been wiped out by someone who claimed to love me. "What are my other options?" "Civil action. You can sue to recover the money. If you can prove he took it without authorization for personal use, you have a strong case. But collecting a judgment is different from winning one. If he doesn't have assets or income, you might win in court and still not recover anything." "What kind of assets are we talking about?" "Property, investments, significant personal belongings. Does your son own anything of value?" I thought about Daniel's house, the modest 2-bedroom ranch he'd bought 5 years ago with my help. The down payment had come from my savings. The monthly mortgage payments, when he couldn't make them, had come from my checking account. "He owns a house," I said slowly, "but I helped him buy it." Patricia leaned forward. "How much did you contribute?" "The full down payment, $25,000. Plus, I've probably paid 6 months' worth of mortgage payments over the years when he was between jobs." "Do you have documentation of those payments?" "Bank records, yes. But nothing that says it was a loan." "That's a problem. Gifts are different from loans in the eyes of the law." Patricia tapped her pen against her legal pad. "However, if you can prove that the recent thefts were made possible by your previous financial support, you might have grounds to claim an interest in the property." "I don't understand." "If your son used your money to maintain his house payments and then used his access to your accounts to steal additional funds, a judge might be willing to consider the house as an asset that's partially yours by right." The idea was staggering. Daniel's house, the home where Zoe spent weekends, where he'd built his adult life, could potentially be seized to pay back what he'd stolen from me. How long would something like that take? Months, possibly a year or more, and there's no guarantee of success. But if you're serious about recovery, it might be your best option. I left Patricia's office with a stack of forms to fill out and a decision to make. Did I want to fight Daniel in court? Did I want to potentially take his home, disrupt Zoe's life, turn our family drama into public record? That evening, Daniel called again. I'd plugged the phone back in because I was expecting a call from my insurance company, and I answered without thinking. Mom, please, we need to talk. We've talked. You stole from me. I'm taking steps to protect myself. I heard you went to see a lawyer. How did you... I stopped. Ocean View was a small town. Word traveled fast, especially when it involved family drama. Yes, I did. Are you really going to sue me? Your own son? Are you really going to keep money you stole from your own mother? I told you. I was going to pay it back. When? How? You don't have a job, Daniel. You don't have income. You don't have a plan that doesn't involve taking more money from people who care about you. I'm working on something. This real estate thing, it's different. It's not some app or tech startup. It's solid, tangible. Stop. I was tired of listening to his schemes. Tired of pretending that optimism was the same thing as a business plan. I don't want to hear about your next idea. I want to hear about how you're going to return my money. What if I can't? The question hung between us. What if he couldn't? What if the money was truly gone, spent on business expenses and living, costs, and the thousand small ways that money disappears when someone doesn't understand the difference between income and assets? Then you'll face the consequences, I said. Like what? Like losing your house. The silence was so long I thought he'd hung up. You would really do that? He finally asked. You would really take my home? You really took my retirement. You really stole my future. You really violated every bit of trust I ever placed in you. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. So yes, if that's what it takes to get my life back, I'll take your house. What about Zoe? What about my daughter? What about her? She'll still have her mother. She'll still have a place to live. She'll still be fed and clothed and loved. The only difference is that her father will finally have to face consequences for his actions. Mom, I'm not your mom right now, Daniel. I'm your victim. And victims have rights too. After I hung up, I sat in Tom's chair and tried to imagine what he would think about the position I was in. Would he approve of my decision to fight back? Would he think I was being too harsh, too unforgiving? But then I thought about his letter, about his warning not to sacrifice my future trying to repair his failures. Tom had worked hard his whole life. He'd understood the value of money because he'd earned every dollar. He never would have taken something that didn't belong to him. Never would have justified theft as temporary borrowing. I thought about Zoe, about the lessons she was learning from watching her father's behavior. What did it teach a 14-year-old girl when her father could steal from her grandmother without consequences? What did it say about responsibility and respect and the way people should treat each other? Maybe losing his house would be the best thing that could happen to Daniel. Maybe it would finally teach him that actions have consequences, that other people's needs matter, that love doesn't mean unlimited forgiveness for increasingly destructive behavior. I picked up the forms Patricia had given me and started filling them out. It was time to stop being Daniel's enabler and start being his teacher, even if the lesson was harder than either of us had ever imagined. The sketchbook appeared on my porch on a Thursday morning, tied with a piece of yellow ribbon and accompanied by a note written in Zoe's careful handwriting. Grandma Helen, I made these for you. Love, Zoe. Inside were dozens of drawings spanning years of our relationship. Me reading to her when she was small, Both of us bent over cookie dough in my kitchen, the two of us walking on the beach collecting shells. But the most recent drawings were different, darker. One showed a little girl sitting between two adults who were turned away from each other, their faces angry. Another depicted a house with a "for sale" sign in the yard, and a small figure crying in the window. Zoe knew, somehow, despite Evelyn and Daniel's attempts to shield her from the adult drama, my 14-year-old granddaughter understood that her family was falling apart. I was still staring at the drawings when my phone rang. "Helen." Evelyn's voice was hesitant, careful. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I know things are complicated right now." "Of course I don't mind. You're always welcome to call." Zoe left the sketchbook, didn't she? I tried to stop her, but she was determined to give it to you herself. She's worried. She's devastated. Daniel told her that you and he are having a disagreement about money, but she's not stupid. She can see that he's scared, and she knows something big is happening. I closed the sketchbook and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the harbor, where fishing boats were preparing for the morning catch. Normal people doing normal work, earning honest livings. "Evelyn, can I ask you something? When you and Daniel were married, did you know about his financial problems?" A long pause. "I suspected. He always had explanations for why money was tight, why bills were late, why we couldn't stick to a budget. But I thought it was just immaturity, something he'd grow out of." "When did you realize it was more than that?" "When I found out he'd taken a second mortgage on our house without telling me, to fund another business idea. We were 3 months behind on the first mortgage, and instead of coming clean about our financial situation, he doubled our debt." "What did you do?" "I gave him an ultimatum. Financial counseling or divorce. He chose divorce." I could hear the pain in her voice even 5 years later. Evelyn had loved Daniel, had wanted their marriage to work, but she'd been smart enough to recognize that some problems couldn't be solved by patience and forgiveness alone. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" I asked. "Fighting him in court? I think you're doing what I should have done years earlier. I think you're finally treating him like an adult who's responsible for his choices. Even if it means he loses his house? Even if it disrupts Zoe's life?" "Helen, Zoe's life has been disrupted by Daniel's choices for years. The constant financial stress, the broken promises, the way he disappears into new schemes whenever reality gets too demanding. At least this way, there might be some justice at the end." After we hung up, I called Patricia Caldwell to schedule a follow-up appointment. The paperwork for the civil suit was ready to file, but she wanted to go over the details one more time. "I've been thinking about your case," Patricia said when I arrived at her office Friday afternoon. "I want to make sure you understand what you're getting into. I understand I'm suing my son to recover money he stole from me. That's the simple version. The complicated version is that you're about to engage in a legal battle that will likely take months, cost thousands in legal fees, and permanently damage your relationship with your son. The relationship is already damaged. He destroyed it when he decided to steal from me." Patricia nodded. I had to ask. Some people have second thoughts once they realize what litigation actually involves. She spread several documents across her desk. "I've drafted the complaint. We're asking for full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest, legal fees, and a lien against his property to secure payment." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means if we win, the court can order the sale of his house to pay what he owes you. If he can't pay in cash, the property becomes yours to do with as you see fit." The reality of what I was doing hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just seeking justice. I was potentially destroying Daniel's life. taking his home, disrupting his stability, forcing him to face consequences that might break him completely. But then I thought about my empty savings account, about the retirement I'd lost, about the 35 years of teaching and saving and sacrificing that had been wiped out by someone who claimed to love me. File it, I said. That weekend, Daniel showed up at my door with Zoe. It was supposed to be his weekend with her, but instead of taking her to his house, he'd brought her to mine. "We need to talk," he said. "Not in front of Zoe. She's part of this family too. She deserves to know what's happening." I looked at my granddaughter, this beautiful girl who'd been caught in the middle of adult failures and poor choices. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with the kind of worry that no 14-year-old should have to carry. "Come in," I said. "Both of you." We sat in my living room, Zoe curled up in the corner of the couch like she was trying to make herself invisible. Daniel paced by the window, his nervous energy filling the room with tension. "Grandma Helen," Zoe said quietly, "are you really going to take our house?" The directness of the question took my breath away. I looked at Daniel, who had the grace to look ashamed. "Zoe, your grandmother and I are having a disagreement about money," Daniel said. "Sometimes adults have to work through complicated problems." "Dad, stop!" Zoe's voice was stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I'm not a little kid anymore. I know you took money from Grandma. I know she's suing you. I know you might lose the house." The silence that followed was deafening. My granddaughter stared at her father with a mixture of love and disappointment that reminded me of myself looking at Daniel. "Why did you do it?" Zoe asked him. Daniel sat down heavily in Tom's old chair. "I thought I could make it work. I thought I could build something successful and pay her back with interest. I thought..." "You thought you could gamble with Grandma's money, and it would be okay because you're family," Zoe said. "That's what Mom says you always do. You take risks with other people's money because you don't really understand what losing means." I stared at my granddaughter, amazed by her insight and heartbroken by her disillusionment. "Zoe," Daniel started. "I heard you on the phone with Uncle Jake last week. You were talking about borrowing money from him for another business idea. Even after what happened with Grandma, you're still trying to get money from family for your projects." Daniel's face went white. I realized that Zoe understood her father better than any of us had given her credit for. She'd been watching, listening, learning what kind of man he really was. "I'm trying to build a future for us," Daniel said weakly. "No, you're not. You're trying to avoid getting a regular job because you think you're too good for normal work." Zoe's voice was steady, matter of fact. "Mom works every day. She gets up early and comes home tired and never complains. But you think you shouldn't have to do that because you have big ideas." The truth of what she was saying settled over the room like dust. Daniel had been so focused on his entrepreneurial dreams that he'd never learned to value ordinary work, steady income, the kind of daily responsibility that actually builds security. "Maybe losing the house would be good for you," Zoe continued. "Maybe you need to learn what it feels like when your choices have real consequences." Daniel looked like he'd been slapped. "Zoe, you don't understand." "I understand that Grandma Helen worked her whole life to save that money. I understand that she was planning to retire and maybe open a bookshop. I understand that you took that away from her without asking." Zoe turned to me. "I also understand that you have to fight back, even if it hurts." I reached over and took her hand. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this." "I'm not in the middle. I'm on your side." She squeezed my fingers. Dad needs to learn that he can't keep hurting people just because they love him. After they left, I called Marla. "How did it go?" she asked. Zoe basically told her father that he needed to face consequences for his actions. A 14-year-old girl understands accountability better than my 38-year-old son. Kids often see things more clearly than adults. They haven't learned to make excuses yet. She said maybe losing the house would be good for him. Maybe he needs to learn what real consequences feel like. Smart girl. She's probably right. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Zoe's words, about the clarity of her moral compass, about the lessons she was learning from watching this family drama unfold. What did it teach her to see her father steal from her grandmother? What did it teach her to see me fight back? What would it teach her if I backed down now? If I let Daniel avoid consequences one more time? I thought about the generations of women in my family who'd been taught to put everyone else's needs first, to smooth over conflicts, to enable rather than confront. My mother had done it with my alcoholic father. I'd done it with Daniel. Was I going to teach Zoe to do the same thing with the men in her life? Monday morning, I called Patricia to check on the status of our filing. "The papers were served Friday afternoon," she said. "Daniel has 30 days to respond." What happens then? If he doesn't respond, we can ask for a default judgment. If he does respond, we move into the discovery phase where both sides exchange information and evidence. How long does the whole process usually take? 6 months to a year, assuming it doesn't settle out of court. Do you think he'll try to settle? That depends on whether he has access to money we don't know about, or whether he's willing to accept the consequences of going to trial. That afternoon, Daniel called. "I got served," he said without preamble. "I know." "Mom, please, can't we work this out without involving the courts? Can't we find some other way?" "What other way? You don't have the money to pay me back. You don't have income to make payments. You don't have a plan that doesn't involve asking someone else to solve your problems." "I could get a job. A real job. I could work out a payment plan. At minimum wage, working full-time. It would take you 20 years to pay back what you've, stolen, assuming you could actually keep a job that long. So what's the alternative? You take my house and I'm homeless? You find an apartment you can afford. You get a job that pays the bills. You start living within your means. You know, like most adults do. What about Zoe? She loves that house. She has her own room, her art supplies, all her things. Zoe will adjust. Children are resilient, especially when their parents finally start acting like responsible adults. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." "I'm not doing anything to you, Daniel. I'm protecting myself from what you've done to me." He hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, Evelyn called. "Daniel told me about the lawsuit," she said. "I want you to know that I support your decision completely. Even though it might disrupt Zoe's living situation, especially because of that. Zoe needs to see that actions have consequences, that people can't just take advantage of others without facing justice. She needs to see a strong woman fighting for herself instead of enabling destructive behavior." "It's hard," I admitted. "Being the bad guy?" "You're not the bad guy. You're the victim who decided to fight back. There's a difference." After we hung up, I went through more old photos, looking for signs of when I'd stopped being Daniel's mother and started being his enabler. The evidence was everywhere once I knew how to look for it. Daniel at 16, crashing my car and me, paying for repairs without making him contribute. Daniel at 25, defaulting on his food truck loan, and me covering the debt. Daniel at 30, losing his apartment deposit, and me writing him a check. Daniel at 35, behind on his mortgage, and me making payments. For over 20 years, I'd been teaching him that his problems were my responsibility, that his failures were mine to fix, that his poor choices didn't have to have lasting consequences as long as I was around to clean up the mess. I'd thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was honoring Tom's memory by making sure Daniel never felt abandoned or unsupported. But I'd actually been dishonoring everything Tom had stood for: personal responsibility, honest work, respect for other people's resources, and trust. Tom had been a man who understood that love meant holding people accountable, not protecting them from the natural consequences of their choices. He would have been horrified to know that his son had become a thief who justified his crimes as family borrowing. It was time to stop being the mother Daniel wanted and start being the mother he needed, even if that meant becoming his adversary in court, even if it meant taking his house to get my life back. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning with no return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a thick report with a business card clipped to the front. Marcus Webb, private investigator, followed by a phone number and the note, "Call me." I almost threw it away. I hadn't hired a private investigator and couldn't imagine why one would be sending me information. But something about the weight of the envelope, the serious tone of that handwritten note, made me curious enough to open it. What I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my son. The report was professionally typed, organized with tabs and highlighted sections like a legal brief. The cover page read, "Financial Activity Investigation, Daniel Thomas Monroe," with dates spanning the last 5 years. As I flipped through the pages, a picture emerged that was so much worse than anything I'd imagined. Daniel hadn't just stolen from me. According to the investigators' findings, he'd taken money from at least 6 other people over the past 3 years. His ex-wife, Evelyn, who'd unknowingly signed loan documents that put their house at risk. His former business partner, Jake, who'd invested $75,000 in the app development company based on falsified financial projections. His landlord, who'd been paying property taxes Daniel was supposed to handle as part of his lease agreement. The list went on. A cousin in Portland who'd loaned him $15,000 for emergency medical expenses that had never existed. An elderly neighbor who'd hired Daniel to renovate her kitchen and paid him $8,000 up front for work he'd never completed. Even Zoe's college fund, which Evelyn had thought was safely managed by Daniel, had been emptied to cover business expenses. But the most shocking revelation was on page 12. Daniel had been married before Evelyn, a woman named Sarah Chen, who'd lived in Boston and had invested her entire divorce settlement, $150,000, in Daniel's first app venture. According to the report, Sarah had filed for bankruptcy 2 years. Later, when the business collapsed and Daniel disappeared, leaving her with nothing but debt and a judgment she couldn't collect. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the end of the report. My son wasn't just irresponsible with money. He was a con artist who'd been systematically defrauding people for years, using charm and family connections and sob stories to convince them to trust him with their life savings. I called the number on Marcus Webb's business card. "Mrs. Monroe," he said when I identified myself. "I was hoping you'd call." "Who hired you to investigate my son?" "I can't reveal my client's identity, but I can tell you that someone who cares about you wanted to make sure you had all the facts before proceeding with your lawsuit." "Someone who cares about me?" "Let's just say there are other people who've been hurt by your son's financial schemes, and they wanted to support your efforts to hold him accountable." "How did you get all this information?" "Public records, mostly. Court filings, bankruptcy documents, business registrations. Your son has left quite a paper trail over the years. I thought about the implications of what I was reading. Are you saying Daniel has done this before? That he's made a pattern of taking money from people? I'm saying your son appears to be a serial fraudster who targets people who care about him. Family members, romantic partners, business associates, neighbors. Anyone who's willing to trust him, with access to their finances. The room started spinning. I sat down heavily in Tom's chair, still holding the phone. Mrs. Monroe, are you all right? I thought this was about bad judgment, poor financial planning. I thought he was just immature and irresponsible. Based on the evidence I've collected, your son's behavior appears to be deliberate and calculated. He identifies vulnerable targets, builds relationships based on trust, then systematically drains their resources before moving on to new victims. Oh my God, what kind of person have I raised? That's not a question I can answer, but I can tell you that stopping him now might prevent him from hurting more people in the future. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process what I'd learned. Everything I thought I knew about Daniel was wrong. He wasn't a dreamer who made poor business decisions. He was a predator who used people's love against them. I thought about Sarah Chen, investing her divorce settlement in a man she'd trusted enough to marry. I thought about the elderly neighbor who'd saved money for kitchen renovations and instead funded Daniel's lifestyle. I thought about Zoe's college fund, emptied to pay for her father's schemes. How many lives had Daniel destroyed? How many people had trusted him the way I had, only to discover that their kindness had made them targets? I called Patricia Caldwell. I need to see you immediately, I said. I have new information about my son's financial activities. What kind of information? The kind that suggests my case is much bigger than we thought. Patricia's office felt different when I arrived an hour later with Marcus Webb's report. She read through it with the focused intensity of a prosecutor, building a case, making notes, and asking questions that I couldn't answer. This changes everything, she said when she finished reading. If these allegations are accurate, your son could be facing criminal charges for fraud, not just civil liability for theft. Criminal charges? Mrs. Monroe, what you're describing isn't just family financial disagreement. It's a pattern of fraudulent behavior targeting multiple victims over several years. The district attorney would be very interested in this information. But he's my son. He's also a criminal who's been systematically destroying people's lives. How many more victims are you willing to let him create while you protect him from consequences? The question hit me like a physical blow. How many more Sarah Chens would Daniel destroy if I didn't stop him? How many more elderly neighbors would lose their savings? How many more business partners would be left with debt and broken dreams? What would criminal charges mean for him? If convicted of multiple counts of fraud, he could face years in prison. His assets would be seized to pay, restitution to victims. His ability to access credit or start businesses would be severely limited. And if I don't pursue criminal charges, he continues what he's been doing. Maybe he gets more careful about paper trails. Maybe he moves to a different state, but the pattern continues. People like your son don't stop voluntarily. That evening, I called Evelyn. Did you know Daniel was married before you? I asked without preamble. Long silence. Then, what are you talking about? I told her about Sarah Chen, about the $150,000 divorce settlement, about the bankruptcy and disappearance. Oh my God, Evelyn whispered. He told me he'd had a few serious relationships, but nothing that led to marriage. He said I was his first real love. Did you know about the college fund? What about it? It's gone. He took all of it. Evelyn started, crying. Helen, I checked that account 6 months ago. It had over $12,000. I thought it was growing, that by the time Zoe graduated high school, there'd be enough for at least a community college degree. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. But it felt like my fault. I was the one who'd raised Daniel to believe that other people's resources were available for his use. I was the one who'd taught him that love meant never having to face consequences. I was the one who'd enabled his transformation from an irresponsible dreamer into a calculating predator. Evelyn, there's something else. The investigator thinks Daniel should face criminal charges. Not just my civil lawsuit, but actual fraud charges that could send him to prison. Good. Good? Helen, I've been waiting 5 years for someone to hold Daniel accountable for what he's done. I've been waiting for someone to see through his charm and recognize him for what he really is. What is he really? A man who believes the world owes him something. A man who thinks his needs justify taking whatever he wants from whoever has it. A man who's never learned that other people matter as much as he does. After we hung up, I went out to my porch and sat in the darkness, listening to the waves against the rocks below. The harbor was quiet except for the occasional sound of a boat engine or the distant call of a foghorn. I thought about all the people Daniel had hurt, all the lives he'd damaged while I was busy making excuses for his behavior. How long had this been going on? Had I been so blinded by maternal love that I'd missed obvious signs of predatory behavior? I remembered the cousin in Portland who'd mentioned lending Daniel money for medical expenses. At the time, I'd been proud that Daniel was handling his own financial emergency without coming to me. Now I realized he'd been lying to his cousin while simultaneously stealing from me. I remembered the elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd seemed confused and sad when I'd asked about her kitchen renovation. She'd said something about changing her mind about the project, but she'd seemed embarrassed about it. Now I understood why. How many other victims were there? How many people had Daniel targeted that hadn't made it into the investigator's report? The next morning I called Marcus Webb again. I want to hire you, I said. For what? To find all of Daniel's victims, to document everything he's done, to build a case that's so strong he can't charm his way out of it. That's a big undertaking, Mrs. Monroe. Are you sure you're prepared for what we might find? I'm prepared to face the truth about my son, however bad it is. The truth might be worse than you think. In my experience, people like Daniel don't stop at financial fraud. They often engage in other forms of manipulation and abuse. What do you mean? Emotional manipulation, relationship fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. Once someone crosses the line into deliberately hurting others for personal gain, they tend to escalate their behavior over time. I thought about Zoe, about the confused and worried expression she'd been wearing lately. I thought about Evelyn's divorce, about her willingness to walk away from her marriage rather than continue dealing with Daniel's financial chaos. Find everything, I said. I need to know exactly who my son really is. It's going to cost money. Could be several $1,000s depending on how deep this goes. I thought about my savings account with its balance of $247. Then I thought about the house Tom and I had built together, the equity that represented 30 years of mortgage payments and careful maintenance. I'll take out a home equity loan if I have to. This is more important than money. That afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Monroe? This is Sarah Chen. I believe you received a report about your son's financial activities. My heart stopped. Sarah? I hired the private investigator. I've been following your lawsuit in the local news, and I wanted you to know that you're not alone. I'm so sorry for what he did to you. I'm sorry for what he did to you, too. But I'm not calling for sympathy. I'm calling because I want to help you stop him. Help me how? I've been documenting Daniel's crimes for 3 years, trying to build a case that law enforcement would take seriously. I have financial records, recorded phone calls, email correspondence where he admits to lying about his business prospects. Recorded. Phone calls? After he disappeared with my money, I got suspicious about some of the things he'd told me. When he finally contacted me asking for more money, I started recording our conversations. I have hours of him describing how he manipulates people into trusting him with their finances. The implications of what she was saying hit me like a tsunami. He admits to manipulating people? He brags about it. He calls it finding investors who believe in the vision. But what he really means is identifying people who are vulnerable to his particular brand of charm. Would you be willing to share those recordings with law enforcement? I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask me that question. That evening I sat in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of my son's crimes. Marcus Webb's report, Sarah, Chen's contact information, bank statements showing years of theft, legal documents outlining a pattern of fraud that stretched back longer than I'd ever imagined. Daniel wasn't just irresponsible. He wasn't just immature. He wasn't just a dreamer who made poor business decisions. He was a criminal who had been systematically destroying people's lives, while I enabled his behavior by refusing to hold him accountable. Tomorrow I would call the district attorney's office. I would turn over every piece of evidence I'd collected. I would help build a case that would finally force Daniel to face the full consequences of his choices. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made. But it was also the right one. Not just for me, but for every future victim I might prevent by finally treating my son like the criminal he'd become. The district attorney's office occupied the 3rd floor of the Cumberland County Courthouse, a granite building that had stood watch over Portland's harbor since 1910. Assistant District Attorney Margaret Sinclair was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of intense focus that comes from spending years prosecuting white-collar crime. Mrs. Monroe, I've reviewed the materials your attorney forwarded, she said, gesturing to a thick file folder on her desk. I have to say, this is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen involving a repeat offender. Repeat offender? Your son has been engaging in financial fraud for at least 5 years, possibly longer. We've identified 8 victims so far, with total losses exceeding $400,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $400,000. How many lives had Daniel destroyed while I was busy making excuses for his behavior? What happens now? We file criminal charges. Multiple counts of fraud, theft, identity theft. Your son was apparently using your Social Security number to apply for credit cards, and conspiracy to commit fraud related to his business partnerships. Identity theft? Margaret opened the file and pulled out a credit report. Your son opened 4 credit cards in your name over the past 2 years. The balances total nearly $30,000. I stared at the documents in front of me. Credit cards I'd never applied for, charges I'd never made, debt in my name that I'd never known existed. Daniel hadn't just stolen my savings. He'd stolen my identity, my credit, my financial future. I had no idea. Most identity theft victims don't, especially when the perpetrator is a family member with access to personal information. Your son was very careful to have the bills sent to a post office box and to make minimum payments to avoid raising red flags. How much do I owe? Nothing. Identity theft victims aren't responsible for fraudulent debt. We'll work with the credit card companies to clear your credit report and remove these accounts. Margaret pulled out another document. There's something else you need to know. We believe your son may have committed tax fraud as well. He's been claiming business expenses for personal purchases and listing family members as business partners who were never actually involved in his companies. He listed me as a business partner. According to his tax returns, you've been a 50% partner in his app development company for the past 3 years. Did you ever sign partnership documents? No, never. That's tax fraud. Using your social security number without permission, claiming business deductions for money that was actually theft, filing false partnership returns. It's a federal crime. The scope of Daniel's deception was staggering. This wasn't just about the money he'd stolen from my retirement account. It was about years of systematic fraud involving multiple victims, false documents, and crimes I was still discovering. What kind of sentence is he looking at? If convicted on all charges, 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The state charges alone could result in 10 years, but the federal crimes carry much longer sentences. 20 years. Daniel would be nearly 60 when he got out, assuming he served his full sentence. Zoe would be in her 30s, probably with children of her own who'd never know their grandfather except as a cautionary tale. Mrs. Monroe, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared to testify against your son in court? The question hung in the air between us. Was I prepared to sit in a witness box and describe how my own child had stolen my future? Was I prepared to face Daniel across a courtroom while prosecutors detailed his crimes for a jury to judge? Yes, I said. I'm prepared. It won't be easy. Defense attorneys in cases like this often try to paint family members as vindictive or motivated by personal grudges rather than justice. My motivation is preventing him from destroying more lives, Margaret nodded. That's exactly the right attitude. But you should know that once we file charges, there's no going back. This becomes a criminal matter, not a family dispute. I understand. Your son will likely be arrested within the next week. He'll have the option to post bail, but given the flight risk and the number of victims involved, we'll be asking for significant bond restrictions. After leaving the courthouse, I drove home in a daze. Everything was happening so fast, yet it felt like I'd been building toward this moment for years without realizing it. Every time I'd made excuses for Daniel's behavior, every time I'd covered his debts, every time I'd chosen enabling over accountability, it had all led to this. My phone was ringing when I walked into the house. Daniel's number on the caller ID. Mom, we need to talk. About what? I know you've been talking to lawyers and investigators. I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you're a criminal who's been systematically defrauding people for years. Silence. Then. Who told you that? It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that it's true. Mom, listen to me. I know I made mistakes, but everything I did was to try to build something successful. I never meant to hurt anyone. You stole $400,000 from 8 different people, Daniel. You used my social security number to open credit cards. You filed false tax returns. You left Sarah Chen bankrupt and homeless. How is any of that not intentionally hurting people? You've been talking to Sarah? I've been talking to all your victims. They're ready to testify against you. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't destroy your own son. I'm not destroying you, Daniel. I'm finally stopping you from destroying other people. What about Zoe? What about your granddaughter? Do you want her to grow up knowing her grandmother sent her father to prison? The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. Daniel was still trying to use my love for Zoe as a weapon. Against me. Still trying to make his consequences my responsibility. I want Zoe to grow up knowing that actions have consequences. I want her to understand that no one is above the law, not even family. I want her to see a strong woman fighting for justice, instead of enabling criminal behavior. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to stop you. He hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, Evelyn came over with Zoe. They'd brought dinner, Chinese takeout from the place downtown, and the three of us sat around my kitchen table like a family that wasn't falling apart. Mom told me about the criminal charges. Zoe said quietly, "I'm sorry you have to deal with this." "I'm not sorry. I'm proud of you for fighting back." Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We both are." "Are you scared?" I asked. "Zoe, a little. But not about Dad going to prison. I'm scared about what would happen if he didn't." "What do you mean?" He was already talking about his next business idea. Something about cryptocurrency trading. I heard him on the phone trying to convince Uncle Jake to invest again. Zoe pushed her rice around her plate. "He's never going to stop, is he?" "Not unless someone makes him stop." The wisdom in my 14-year-old granddaughter's words was heartbreaking. She understood something about her father that had taken me years to recognize. Daniel wasn't going to change voluntarily. He was going to keep hurting people until someone with authority forced him to stop. "The prosecutor says he'll probably be arrested this week," I told them. "Good," Evelyn said. "Maybe this will finally give his other victims some closure." "I've been thinking about Sarah Chen," Zoe said. "About how Dad destroyed her life and then just moved on like it didn't matter. How many other people has he done that to?" "More than we know, probably. When I was little, I thought Dad was just unlucky. I thought his businesses failed because of bad timing or mean partners or unfair competition." Zoe looked up at me with Tom's eyes. "But they didn't fail because of bad luck, did they? They failed because he was stealing money instead of actually building businesses." The clarity of her understanding was stunning. Zoe had seen through Daniel's elaborate justifications and recognized the truth. He wasn't an unlucky entrepreneur. He was a con artist who used business terminology to disguise theft. "What do you want me to tell him when he calls?" Evelyn asked. "Tell him that his family still loves him, but we won't enable his criminal behavior anymore. Tell him that if he wants a relationship with Zoe, he needs to accept responsibility for what he's done and work to make amends." "Do you think he will?" "I don't know. But I know that protecting him from consequences hasn't helped him become a better person. Maybe facing real consequences will." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the conversation with Margaret Sinclair, about the scope of Daniel's crimes, about the families he'd destroyed while I was busy being his enabler. I thought about Sarah Chen, investing her divorce settlement in a man she'd trusted enough to marry. I thought about the elderly neighbor who'd lost her kitchen renovation money. I thought about Zoe's college fund, emptied to support Daniel's lies. But I also thought about the future victims who wouldn't exist because Daniel was finally going to face consequences. The families who wouldn't lose their savings. The business partners who wouldn't be left with debt and broken promises. The vulnerable people who wouldn't be targeted by a predator, who'd learned that charm and family connections could be weaponized against those who cared about him. Tomorrow, Daniel would probably be arrested, Within weeks, he'd be facing trial on multiple felony charges. Within months, he'd likely be in prison, finally forced to confront the reality that his actions had consequences. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done as a mother, but it was also the most important. Because real love isn't about protecting people from consequences. Real love is about caring enough to hold them accountable, even when accountability is painful, even when it means watching your child face justice for the crimes they've committed, even when it means choosing the needs of his victims over the comfort of your family. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly honoring Tom's memory, not by enabling Daniel's destructive behavior, but by finally teaching him the lessons about responsibility and accountability that we should have taught him decades ago. I woke the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The night before Zoe's insight had stayed with me. He's never going to stop unless someone makes him. She was right. I'd spent decades trying, and failing, to steer Daniel toward responsibility. It was time for someone else to intervene. Margaret Sinclair from the county DA's office was waiting in my kitchen, her suit crisp, her laptop open to case files. "We scheduled the arraignment for tomorrow morning," she said. I nodded. No relief, just resolution. "Will he plead?" I asked, watching her slide documents across the table. "Unknown. But based on the charges, serial fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, we're seeking a full indictment." I nodded again. It felt strange to be on the side of authority, to be complicit in the downfall of my own son. But victims mattered. His victims needed justice. And maybe, just maybe, he needed consequences. The courthouse steps were cold and gray at 8 a.m., but inside was warmer. The buzz of voices, snapping, of cuffs, the swivel of courtroom doors. Daniel appeared in handcuffs. I hadn't seen him like this. So small, so lost. Our eyes met briefly across the room. I felt nothing but resolve. His betrayal had been so deep, so persistent, that only the full weight of the law would stop it. The judge read the charges. Daniel stood silent. The bail hearing followed. Prosecutors stressed flight risk, his pattern of moving money, disappearing, defrauding others. The judge agreed, setting a high bond and a long list of restrictions. No internet, no personal devices without supervision, no phones without prior approval. He would remain in custody until trial. Back home, I found myself in a different kind of courtroom. Paperwork, letters from creditors, restitution estimates, account statements. The looming question, should I seek restitution for every victim or focus on my own loss? I decided on a middle path. Ask state prosecutors to join my civil suit, share documentation to support parallel actions. Margaret agreed. Civil suits could augment criminal ones, and joint evidence would strengthen both. That afternoon, Sarah Chen visited. She carried a folder of her own, emails from Daniel, bank statements, eviction notices. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were fierce. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "He needs consequences." We shared a hug. 2 mothers betrayed, 2 lives upended by the same man. News of the arrest hit the town like a wave. Conversations hushed when I entered the grocery store. People stared, some in sympathy, others in judgment. "Good for you," Marla said when we met for coffee. "Bold, right, and necessary." I nodded, sipping my latte. Bold, painful, and long overdue. 2 weeks later, I heard rumors that Daniel was being moved to the county jail. For a moment, my stomach dropped, and then I recalled the words of my granddaughter. Maybe losing the house will be good for him. I took a deep breath. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping harm. For his victims, but also for me, for closure, and for teaching Zoe that no one is above accountability. Margaret remained my steadfast ally. We convened a meeting with my lawyer Patricia, her office, and the DA's team. Given the severity, we'll pursue felony charges, Margaret explained. But your civil case could recover funds for you and help fund restitution to the other victims. I nodded. What about the house? There's a lien, Patricia said. If criminal restitution and civil judgments both succeed, proceeds from the sale or refinancing will apply to your claim first. 2 men at the table, one representing law and order, the other representing my personal fight, worked in tandem. I felt a quiet satisfaction. My story would resolve not just for me, but for everyone he had hurt. The first time I visited Daniel, he looked worn, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders bowed. But his eyes still searched mine for forgiveness, for understanding, for absolution. We sat across a plexiglass divider. I asked about Zoe. He said he missed her drawings, missed seeing her gentle face. Sorry isn't enough, I told him. He didn't argue. He just nodded. I spent my whole life making excuses for you, I said softly, covering for you, bailing you out, letting you keep taking. And every time I believed your next plan would work. But it never did, and so many people suffered. He looked broken. This, I gestured around the room, this will stop it. He lowered his head. Do what you have to do. Cooperate. Acknowledge what you did. Try to help others know the truth. I paused. Maybe you can make it right, but only if you own it. Zoe no longer resisted my decision. When I sat her down, she didn't cry. She held my hand. I get it, Grandma. I don't want to lose him, but I don't want anyone else to lose their savings. She smiled with fierce pride. She was right. Her voice, her clarity, echoed through every choice I'd made. Thank you, I told her. She hugged me. I'm proud of you, Grandma. The trial began 6 months later, and the courthouse was packed. Media, victims, neighbors. The DA's office laid out exhibit after exhibit. Bank statements, forged signatures, false tax returns, conversations admitting fraud. Daniel watched from the defendant's table. He looked smaller than before, thinned, worn, stripped of bravado. When it was his turn, he pleaded guilty. He said he took what he thought he could pay back. His words, not mine. He denied being a con artist, but his guilt was clear. Sentencing came next month. 12 years in federal prison, police restitution orders and probation. The judge said, "You violated the trust of those who loved you most. You will pay the price." The day after the verdict, I visited the bank to check on my financial profile. Credit accounts gone. Debts wiped clean. A lien on Daniel's house. A federal restitution order. Would I ever see the money? Maybe not all of it. It might take decades. But I had something more valuable than money. The truth. Justice. A foundation to build on. I canceled the plan to sell the house, trusting my pension and the minimal monthly restitution were enough to carve out my future. That summer I rented a small storefront on the harbor, Ocean's Page, lined shelves with local authors, beach reads, copies of Joyce Carol Oates, and Maine poetry. The grand opening was small. Marla, Evelyn, Zoe, Sarah, Patricia, Margaret. We toasted with sparkling cider. Zoe giggled as a customer commented on her grandmother's bravery. "Oh, it's not bravery," I said. "It was necessary." She understood. She grasped the line between love and harm. I stocked the shop with kids' books, teaching them lessons I'd learned, and some I'd failed to teach through example. Autumn came. The shop was busy. I hosted story hours and book clubs. I gardened. I wrote letters. I paused to reflect at Tom's stone bench overlooking the harbor. It was peaceful in a way I never felt when caring for Daniel's crises. And yet, he'd remain in my thoughts, from prison, at every GED session, every restitution hearing, a son who taught me the limits of love, a man I could not recognize, but still, my son. One June afternoon, I received a letter. Daniel had enrolled in anger management, small business classes, and counseling. He wrote, "I ripped you off. I stand by my actions. I am sorry beyond words. It is too late to undo the past. But I'm trying to learn." I cried. Not forgiveness, not yet. But at least acknowledgement. At least growth. I wrote back, "Good. That's a start." Zoe started working part-time in the shop, shelving books, reading to toddlers. She flourished, grounded by responsibility and honesty. I watched her from behind the counter one morning. She paused mid-aisle, pointing out a book to a friend. "Look, this one's about doing hard things when others don't." I stood up straighter, knowing I'd done the hardest thing, standing up to my own son. Each evening I walked to Tom's bench and watched the tide come in. I feel grateful for the second chance I carved out, a life rebuilt on courage and consequence. Still miss Daniel in the way a parent never stops wondering, because love doesn't die easily. But I don't regret my choices, not for a moment. I used to think being a mother meant giving until there was nothing left. But motherhood, real strength, means knowing when to fight back, when love becomes enabling, when protection becomes harmful. My statement to the court became my life's mantra. I trusted too long. I loved too much. But there comes a point where love must yield to accountability. In the end, my future isn't defined by what he took from me, but by what I built afterward. A community bookstore, a life of honesty, a legacy that respects boundaries and embraces integrity. I may have lost a son to my fight for justice, but I gained my life back. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.